Previously, we've talked about schedules and creating network diagrams and Gantt charts. But the way that we've been doing that is called resource unconstrained, which is to say that we assume that we have all the resources that we do to execute the project, and so the project length is determined only by the different activities, their durations, and then the predecessor and successor relationships between the activities. However, we're now going to deal with a further complication, which is that activities take resources, and we don't always have all the resources that we would like. So how do we plan for projects in a resource-constrained environment? Here's a project. It has 4 activities, which is the requirements, coding module 1, coding module 2, and testing. And as you can see, the requirements is the first activity and has no predecessor. Coding modules 1 and 2 both have requirements as a predecessor, and test has coding modules 1 and module 2 as predecessors, and so can only be started after both those activities are completed. We also have durations for these activities, and we have the resource requirements. Requirements requires 1 analyst. Each of the coding activities requires 1 software developer, and then testing requires a tester and a software developer. So first thing we need to do is to figure out how much resources do we need. So in order to do that, we're going to use something called a resource histogram, which is just as this Gantt chart is a depiction of activities versus time. Resource histogram is a graph of resources versus time. So for the first 2 weeks, all we need is 1 analyst. So on the analyst histogram chart, we have 1, and that goes for weeks 1 and 2. And this one would actually be okay. And as you see, we don't need software developers or testers. In week 3, we have 2 tasks, each of which requires 1 software developer. So we're going to designate that for week 3, and we put that down here, and we're showing that we need 2. And as you see, we don't need any analysts in week 3, and we don't need any testers. In week 4, we only need 1 software developer in week 4. We needed 2 in week 3, but 1 in week 4 because now we only have 1 activity. So that's what we'll show. Then in weeks 5 and 6, we need 1 software developer and 1 tester. So we can depict that here. Here. So these are the resource histograms. Now, as you see, we have we need 2 in week 3. But what if we only had 1 software developer available to the project? In that case, we would have to stretch out our schedule. For example, what we could do is we could move it like this and move it like this. Now let's talk about why we did what we did. This is not to imply that now that we have only 1, coding module 1 is a predecessor to coding module 2. In fact, this has nothing to do with this must be done before. This is just that we can only work on 1 thing at a time. Equivalently, we could do it like this. If we did it like this, it still would be that requirements are required to be completed before coding module 1 starts, and requirements need to be completed before coding module. So these 2, whether it's like this or like this, are really the same. And then, of course, testing can only be done after both modules are coded. So that moves out here. And as you see now, previously the project was 6 weeks long. Now it's 7 weeks long. So let's see what that does to our resource histogram. Okay, requirements, 1 analyst in week 1. Requirements, 1 analyst in week 2. Now, we only need 1 developer in week 3, 1 in week 4, 1 in week 5, 1 in week 6, and now we're going to need one in week 7. Now for the tester, previously, before we had the resource unconstrained course, we had a tester in week 5 and week 6. But because testing has slipped out 1 week, we need a tester in week 6 and a tester in week 7. So by stretching out the project by 1 week, we can work within our constraint of having only 1 software developer. So whereas previously we had talked about the resource unconstrained scheduling case, now we are talking about resource constraints and how that can affect schedules.